Praise boss when morning work bells chime. Praise him for bits of overtime. Praise him whose wars we love to fight. Praise him, fat leech and parasite. Amen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Bougie Horror Podcast Show. I am Ellie Zara, and this is my friend Luke St. Peter.
Hey, Luke St. Peter here, pronouns he, him, his.
And I'm Ellie, and I go by she, her, hers. And we are both going to start doing this podcast. By the time you're hearing this, it should already be the fall season, or at least pretty close to the fall season. And we have a pretty makeshift situation right now, but hopefully it gets ironed out in the future. We are going to talk about a lot of different horror media over the course of 13 episodes. And we're going to start with the book by Matt Ruff called Lovecraft Country. But first, Luke, do you want to tell us a little bit about your experience with horror and kind of where you're coming from?
Sure. So with my experience with horror, growing up, I was a Goosebumps kid. Never bought any of the books, but every time I was at my school library, I was always checking out a Goosebumps book. Also remember watching the classic horror movies like Halloween, Dracula, The Blob, things of that nature. And I kind of weaned out of horror to read more nonfiction over the years. But more recently, I've been getting back into my old school interests.
Cool, yeah. And I have a pretty similar trajectory, honestly. I also grew up on Goosebumps books. I loved R.L. Stine as a kid. And I watched, various kind of spooky shows. Nickelodeon's Are You Afraid of the Dark was a favorite of mine when I was a kid. I loved Real Monsters, even though that wasn't really horror, but kind of had horror creatures. As I got older, I really enjoyed horror films. My mom was really into horror, so she got me into it. And yeah, similar to you, classics like Jaws or Halloween is one of my favorites. And over time, I started to not watch horror as much in my teen and sort of early adult years. And then in the last, I'd say about 6 or 7 years, I've started really getting back into horror. My partner and I watch about 15 horror movies every October, which we've been doing for, almost as long as we've been dating each other. So, I'm pretty well versed in film, especially. That's more of my specialization there. But I do love a good horror book as well. So, with that said, we are going to get into Lovecraft Country. Now, how this is going to work is this is going to be a two-parter. We are going to talk about the first 4 chapters of Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff and kind of introduce the book as well. And then the next time we'll get around to the other 4 chapters and the epilogue. So, first off, I think the most surprising part of this to me was when I was looking at who wrote the book. I was like, well, this book's very widely acclaimed, and it got turned into an HBO series, which we might look at in the second season of this show. I was like, well, I mean, clearly he's a black man. And I look up Matt Ruff, and he's just the whitest old guy I've ever seen in my life. I was like, oh, okay. Well, he did a damn good job then. Good for him. You know what I mean? So I do think it's good for these kind of books to be written, predominantly by people of color. But I think it is great that when a white person can really nail it, because honestly, there are still people out there, I'm sure, who would not be as inclined to listen to the experiences of people of color or, black people in particular, if they wrote this book. And so, Matt Ruff is definitely not that. So, that was a big surprise to me. But we start off Lovecraft Country with Lovecraft Country itself. And I was actually surprised to find out that Lovecraft Country isn't just Lovecraft Country, right? It's 8 intersected kind of stories that are going back and forth with each other. And have a lot of similar characters and similar themes. Obviously, racism is being one of the predominant ones, but it's not the only one. Luke, what did you think about Lovecraft Country?
Oh, one of the things I noticed when I was actually reading the back of the book after I was finished reading the story was that it was originally intended to be like an HBO type series. And so he actually wrote out the story with that in mind. And it just happened to be a book first, then an HBO series later, which is why it seems like eight distinct stories that are kind of relatively loosely tied together, which I thought made it for an interesting narration. Because it seemed more like a tapestry of stories rather than just your regular old series of chapters where everything was clearly linear. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Yeah, I was a big fan of the book overall. I thought it was pretty much a home run. Every now and then I felt like there were some things that felt a little bit of a plot convenience for me, especially towards the end of the book. But generally speaking, I was
Yeah.
really a fan of the way that this book tackled racism and tackled, historical inequality and just linked that with horror, which obviously we've already seen from notable people such as Jordan Peele with his trilogy of movies. So yeah, it's a great topic, and I mean, unsurprisingly, horror and racism go hand in hand. So the first story is, of course, Lovecraft Country itself. A little bit about the story. Basically, this guy called Atticus is driving down the road, and he gets stopped by the police officer on his way to, I think it's Chicago, and he's on his way to see his dad. And ultimately, his dad ends up roping him up in this this big plot for them to discover their roots and figure out who they are and like why, where they came from and stuff like that. Obviously, there's a lot of references to slavery here and plantations and um, stuff like that. The first couple parts of Lovecraft Country, the chapter, not the book, made me think about how many places in the U.S. are named after dead slave owners, which was kind of a morbid thought that I had, especially in the South. I'm sure
Well,
it's not that uncommon.
and actually, the full name of thinking of places named after like slave owners and shit. The full name of the state of Rhode Island is, I'm sure you're aware, is the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations.
Oh my
Um,
God, I actually didn't know that. That's crazy.
I know. So, I mean, we even have an entire state named after named after like slave stuff.
Jesus. I legit did not know that. That's wild. So, yeah, I mean, and especially, like I said in the South, I'm sure that maybe there's some northern places too, but um
Yeah.
yeah, it's just kind of wild to me. But yeah, I was pretty struck by the travel guide. I mean, I don't know if this was a real thing. I kind of forgot to like follow up on that. But I mean, I
Oh,
wouldn't be surprised if there really was like some kind of travel guide for Black people back in the 50s, 40s, up until, gosh, I don't know, even the 70s or 80s or more, just so they can get around and go to places that would, not be discriminatory towards them. Obviously, segregation was
right.
outlawed in the 60s, but even with that, you still have decades of anti-racist work to be done to undo the effects of people still segregating in practice, even if the laws don't necessarily back them up.
Actually, this is why I'm glad I read the back of the book because there was a Q&A with the author. And while the literal name of the guidebook was fictitious, it was actually based upon a real guidebook written by Victor Hugo Green, and it was called the Negro Motorist Green Book.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
and so it so the Safe Negro Travel Guide, as it was named, as Matt Ruff named it, that in itself wasn't real, but it was based on a real thing.
Yeah. Okay. I presumed as much. So, yeah. So basically, I mean, Atticus heads over to his father, and they kind of have a tete-a-tete, or he's thinking about the times that they've had back and forth stuff like that.
Yeah.
And one thing about Atticus is he's really into science fiction, and I thought this was a good way to highlight the way that marginalized people, not just Black people, but queer folks, like Luke and us, like both really love horror as escapism. It's there's been books written about the intersections of LGBT plus like communities and individuals and horror subgenres. Obviously, we've had horror intersect with LGBT plus people in the past. You can look at obviously I saw the TV Glow, which is a very recent example, but even like the sequel to Nightmare on Elm Street, which famously had like some stuff about BDSM and queer stuff, and of course you have Hellraiser as well. So
Right.
yeah, go ahead, Luke.
No, go ahead. I was just agreeing with you.
Oh, okay. So yeah, it's been a thing. But yeah, I did you have any like big thoughts about like anything in your notes about like the early parts of this stuff when Atticus is like meeting his dad or anything like really pop up to you?
So one thing I noticed was that it wasn't Attic because his Montrose was the father, right? Yeah. Um, like he
Yes.
seemed to he seemed to be a very strict father. But I kind of feel like he wasn't he, like Matt Ruff didn't write him like a stereotypical strict Black father. He kind of allowed certain deviation from that where it was kind of like, yeah, that might have been like some of the things might have been stereotypical, but he intentionally wrote the relationship in such a way where it was unique at the same time, which I think is very important for allies to do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You don't want to perpetuate stereotypes, but you do want to highlight the realness of it. It makes me think about when you have the strict parents trope that Asian people have to deal with, and
Right.
that a lot of them, are I think Indian folks have to deal with the same thing, but you have this stereotype that all of their parents are harsh and strict and always, kind of get on their case about this or that. Honestly, that's
Yeah.
just parents by and large, but obviously with exceptions. But it's still good to highlight that stuff does happen. I mean, stereotypes suck, but they often happen within some kind of kernel of truth or reality of a situation. It's just exaggerated, often at the expense of the people who you're talking about. So yeah, I totally agree with you. There are moments where Montrose has sympathy or compassion or lets his kind of shell fall between him and Atticus, and I think those are good moments. They're very small moments and they're very subtle. And I'm sure a guy like Montrose would never admit that they're even there, but they are, and I think that's
Right.
pretty clear to anyone who's reading this. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So anyway, eventually they head over to Mass, my neck of the woods, and they basically go to this place called Ardham. And there is actually a place around Mass called Arkham, Mass, which is the birthplace of H.P. Lovecraft. I almost said H.G. Wells since we were talking about sci-fi. And H.P. Lovecraft. And yeah, so I mean, that's pretty neat. I've never been there myself, but I was aware of it. And I was kind of like looking up every now and then, like, is this a real place? Is this a real place? Like almost none of the places that they mention in Lovecraft Country, the chapter, are real, but they're obviously based on certain areas. They are outside Worcester County, which is of course a real place, and I had lived in Worcester myself, so yeah, cool to see, I guess, is what I'm getting at. Honestly, one thing I really want to emphasize is that Letitia was like the MVP of like the entire book, probably,
Right.
especially here where she basically like saves Atticus's ass and Montrose's ass, and I think she does it like twice in this story, and then like later on down the line she befriends a ghost, and then even later on she um like saves their ass again. So like
Yeah.
shout out to Letitia because like she was like the goat in this book. She
It-
always knew what was going on.
and I love how Matt in, wrote into this very well, the concept of a strong Black woman. Like he didn't like he he didn't play really too much into negative stereotypes when he was doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she's just a badass, and it's not like she doesn't have flaws or faults, and it's not like she doesn't have quirks or little bits
Right.
about her that some people might not like. Right, her whole backstory with her mom being very into God, but also kind of manipulating people for money. Well, Letitia is like not as bad as that, but also like, well, God would want me to go with you guys to go find this cult, right? I mean, they didn't know
Right.
it was a cult at the time, but yeah, it's just she's just such a great character. I honestly think she was one of my favorites in the book, and we'll get to that her befriending the ghost. But yeah, eventually they get to this manor, and they after a big fight with some cops and stuff like that, and some spooky ambiance and stuff like that. I thought this action scene was really done really well. It really pulled me in. I really felt like I was there, and that there were these creatures in the woods, and then also these cops, and it was hard for them to differentiate who was who, which especially back then, very real.
Right.
So I thought it was really well done. Did you have any thoughts about this kind of like action scene that they had before they got to the manor?
This is where the book and the chapter were aptly named Lovecraft Country, because Lovecraft, and like I haven't read all of his short stories, but I've read enough to get the idea that Lovecraft loved the fear of the unknown, which I got that sense in this chapter and just throughout the book, that the characters themselves were fearful of the unknown, of whether that was whatever was happening next, or whether it was fear of the unknown of the Winthrop family. And so I feel like, and with the cops in particular, like they didn't know whether they were about to face cops or other kinds of monsters or any other kinds of horrors. And then when they did face cops, they had a general sense that the cops were going to be racist, but they didn't know exactly how. There's a very much an unknown of how that was going to play out. And then certain things surprisingly worked out in their favor. But even when it was working out in their favor, there were still horrors about. And so I thought that was the Lovecraftian concept of fear of the unknown was well played out
Yeah.
in that scene.
And of course it probably goes without saying, right? I don't think Luke and I need to address this, but I mean it's well known that H.P. Lovecraft was a gigantic racist, possibly repentant towards the end of his life, but still a huge racist for a lot of his life. And obviously the irony of Lovecraft Country, being about these empowering black characters within kind of a Lovecraftian world, I think is very well done. It's not too on the nose. I think it makes it even funnier that it's written by a white guy. And I'm sure at least early to mid Lovecraft would be horrified by the notion. But again, I'm aware at least that some amount of, changing of his mind, I guess, to some extent happened later in his life through letters and whatnot. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'm less familiar with H.P. Lovecraft than Luke is.
All right, so I think so after they encounter the racist cops and stuff, and that all goes down, that's when they actually get to the mansion, right?
Right.
So that turns out to be that's really like where like the particulars of the Lovecraftian thing played out, because excuse me, sorry, because that that's when they encountered I guess you call them wizards, or magicians or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, I think some kind of wizard is right.
And I love that not only were they just wizards, which could really be a lot of different horror stuff, we could even fit into fantasy, but where he fit it into horror is that their wizardry like goes way back into time. Like there's an antiquated lineage to this fraternity, and it even goes back to like the plantation days themselves, where one of the members of the order, when the original mansion was burned to a crisp, one of the members of the order, I think it was, ran off with one of the black maids, and and then started their life like in a completely new city in New England, which I thought was an interesting twist.
Yeah, I thought that was really well done. And generally, the twists that happened here were really good, especially with Atticus, too, and his lineage. I thought that was handled very well. Atticus has this really badass moment where he does a speech and basically shuts up the entire cult. I thought that was really good and really
Yes,
well done. I didn't at first know that these were eight interlocking stories. I thought it was just one big like book about this story, the Lovecraft Country story. So
right,
when like he was immediately like, "This is a trap. We have to get out of here as soon as possible." I was like, "Bro, we got like 200. Like, what are we doing? We got like 300 pages. Where are you off
right,
to?" But it turned out, that the story is really only like 20, 30 pages. But yeah, I mean, they catch on real quick, and it makes the characters seem smarter than a
yeah,
lot of horror characters who will be like, "Well, I think this is just fine. I don't mind knives. Like whatever. Like all that blood, who cares?" And
right,
you just seem like a complete dumbass. Like why you get out of there? So, and horror movies have gotten better about that over the years, and horror genre media stuff especially has gotten better with addressing stuff like that. Why are they not calling anyone, or why are they not leaving, yada yada. So they address that really well here because it's a short story, so they don't have time to fuck around and be like, "Oh well, we can't leave." So they just
right.
immediately try to bust Montrose out, and they have a really cool scene with that with the dogs too that I thought was really good. There's a couple of lines I really liked from this. So yeah, when they're talking about how the bears and the dogs will get the blacks, and of course they clarify that they're talking about animals or something like that. There's kind of a
Right,
double entendre there, whether they're talking. I mean, they are. They're basically talking about Atticus and Letitia and Montrose and so on and so forth. But they're also
right,
talking about, you know, uh, outsiders or I forget exactly who they're talking about, but they're talking about like raccoons uh, and bears and deer and stuff like that, animals. And then they talk about black bears, and they say, but the blacks are bad enough. They're smart, not
hmm,
smart. They're beasts, but clever enough to cause mischief, and they're persistent. We use dogs to drive them off, but sometimes they won't quit even after they've been hurt. So I definitely was like looking side-eyed at that line. I'm like, there's no way like Matt Ruff like put that there without like the double meaning, right? So I thought that was really
right.
clever. Just a lot of good
Yeah, go
little
ahead.
bits like that, little writing like that. So to wrap this up, eventually there is a spell, and it kind of goes wrong, and Atticus ends up, really coming through. I think they mess a lot in this book with the magic black man trope. And you see this in like Disney movies and stuff like that, where you have like the magic black man who can like do anything, usually anthropomorphized as some kind of animal, right? But often you have that in Disney movies, or you
Right.
have it in especially in like older movies where it was used a lot. Oh yeah, so I guess Spike Lee
Uh,
noted The Green Mile and The Legend of Bagger Vance,
oh
which
yeah,
or Vance.
oh yeah, John Coffey. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So those are two good examples that Spike Lee noted back a long time ago now. But yeah, so the story ends, and I mean it's a generally kind of happy story. There's some
Right.
betrayals and twists and turns. Anything towards the end of the story that really like stood out to you and like you were really impressed by?
So yeah, there was the black magic guy trope, like you were saying. One of the things I liked was how Atticus was actually able to use like get the spell right the first time, in order to end the whole ceremony, because one wrong move and everything could have gone horribly wrong. Which might have been kind of like, I guess that could have been one of those things where it was like, yeah, well, it was like too quick of an ending type of a thing.
Sure.
But considering the original concept of the book, that was supposed to be a series first and then a book later, but it ended up being reversed, made sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think they played this really well, and the ending came as a surprise to me just because of how quickly it came and stuff like that. But I thought that it was pulled off really well, and they end up escaping the manor, of course, because they kind of have to for the rest of the stories to happen. And all the
Yes.
other stories have a kind of, they interlock and they have similar characters. And there's a lot about like the butler too, which I liked. Just little bits and pieces of like the butler, like not really wanting to do his job, but kind of feeling like he has to, but also not being
Right.
entirely honest with Atticus and everybody else. It was also nice, like, to see those characters get a bit of like the lavish treatment just for a minute. Like they get these
Yeah.
nice dresses and silks and stuff that they're able to wear, and definitely not a thing they'd be able to do, in Chicago. But I thought that was a nice touch too. This was a really good start to all of these stories. I don't think
Oh,
there's much else I'd want to highlight, but yeah, Luke, go ahead.
one thing that I thought about earlier that kind of slipped my mind as soon as it got there, but it kind of came back to me when you said Chicago.
Yeah,
Interesting little note. Martin Luther King Jr. actually called Chicago the most racist city in America. And so I kind of wonder if Matt chose that city on purpose
that's
with that
interesting.
line.
I didn't know he said that. That could very well be. I would not be surprised. I did not know that. I've never heard that quote, so that's interesting. That Matt may have spoken on that at one point or another. It wouldn't surprise me anyway.
Right.
I want to finish on this quote that I really like from this story. George says that stories are like people, Atticus. Loving them doesn't make them perfect. You try to cherish their virtues and overlook their flaws, but the flaws are still there, though. And I really like that quote. That quote really stood out to me really nicely. I think it's just a nice general quote about how to view people and just kind of how, I don't know, how human relations work. It's a really good way to kind of epitomize that or generalize. So anyway, this is the first episode, so it's not going to be consider this a rough draft. But yeah, we're
Right.
going to move on to the second story, and in just a second, we will be right back. Okay, we are back. We're going to talk about Dreams of the Witch House, and this is the WHICH pun on the WITCH.
Right.
So this one's all about the anxieties of being a homeowner as a black person in the 50s. And it's kind of a ghost story, but as you'll find out very quickly, it's not a conventional ghost story. And I really like the way that Matt Ruff did this. What the general summary of the story is that Letitia, we see her, I don't know, maybe a months later or a year later. It's not super like a long time after, but long
Yeah.
enough. And Letitia's looking for a place to live in Chicago, and she comes along and finds this place in a mostly white neighborhood, if not all white neighborhood. And she is looking to make a buy on it. And because of some of the money that she's fallen into, because of the previous story, if I remember correctly, she is able to buy it with a cash offer. And so she gives the cash offer, she moves in, ghostly shenanigans ensue. Does that sound about right, Luke? I'm pretty sure I remembered most of it.
I Yeah, that's about right. Um, I do want to make mention as far as the money situation is concerned. The money was originally given under the pretense that the person giving the money to Letitia was in debt to Letitia's father. So he was paying back the debt to Letitia since the father was dead. And as we'll find out in one of the later chapters, Caleb Braithwaite was actually behind the Letitia buying the house.
Gotcha. Right. Yeah, so that was some of the reasoning for it. And there's some mystery about who's actually helping Letitia and who isn't. And it's kind of, I'm pretty sure it's said out and out to the reader, but Letitia's left in the dark until the end. I would
Correct.
say this is very much a haunted house ghost story kind of story. The
Yep.
first one's kind of mystical, religious cult, obviously very Lovecraftian horror vibes there,
Yeah.
and with the fear of the unknown, like Luke mentioned. This one's a bit more grounded, relatively. There's not really any presence of cults, but there is the presence of a ghost. And what ends up happening is Letitia and her sister, I believe, Ruby, who will be brought up later in another story, going back to all how they're intersecting with each other, come into this home, and Letitia I think she asked Atticus to come back after the weekend to help her fix up the house and kind of protect her from the white people, because basically they're constantly harassing her, throwing shit at her window. And I mean, I think even some kids came in at some point and they basically tried to burn the house down. So eventually, what ends up happening is Ruby leaves. Ruby's the smart one. She leaves because the house is clearly haunted and she wants nothing to do with it. And one thing that I thought was interesting that I noticed on page 108, at least on my copy, is that a lot of the money that the Ghost family came from is cotton money, textile mills, slavery, plantation, all that stuff. And
Yeah.
now a black woman owns that same house. So, Letitia kind of makes a remark about things coming back around on page 108 that I really liked. So, I really liked that. And just the general idea of black people having to deal with bank loans is in of itself a terrible thing, especially in the 50s. And I mean, anywhere between like for a long time, really. I'm trying to like make a timeline here, but the bottom line is black people have are going to have these issues and have these issues for up until I would say even the 80s or 90s, right? But especially in the
Yeah.
50s, right, where Jim Crow hasn't been ended, and at least as of right now, the Brown versus Board of Education hasn't happened, and Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all this stuff hasn't happened yet, right? So there's just a lot of kind of realness for the horror. Luke, was there anything in the early goings of the story that really stood out to you, similar to any of the things I said?
I did think it was like, I don't know if normalcy is the right word here, but I do like that Matt Ruff did bring like some relatively normal horror. Like it was, I would say it was still kind of a fear of the unknown of what the ghost would do. In that sense, it was Lovecraftian, but it was a normal horror in the sense that haunted houses are a very common theme in the horror genre in general. Probably the ghost story subgenre, the paranormal subgenre of horror, is one of my favorites. In fact, my two of the horror books that I grew up with as a kid, the Scary Stories Treasury, and then Ruth and Music, three books. Those were all ghost story books, which I thought were in that. I'm glad there was some normalcy brought to the horror, in that it kind of makes it appealing to your everyday horror fan.
Right.
Because I almost kind of feel like if it were too Lovecraftian, then would have really only appealed to a niche group within the horror fandom. But bringing some normalcy back into it kind of makes the appeal more broad.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think generally speaking, Lovecraft Country as a book is very eclectic. There's ghost stories, there's creepy dolls, there's religious cults, there's kind of more sci-fi horror, as we'll see later with Hippolyta, excuse me. There is really out there stuff with the Jekyll and Hyde Park, and more ghost stories, and so on and so forth. So yeah, we'll get to all that stuff. But Dreams of the Witch House, which has Letitia, I just love Letitia so much. I think it's really funny. The subtext is that a black woman is trying to buy this house, but a white
Mm-hmm.
figure, aka a ghost, will not let her have it, right? And
Right.
so this kind of subtext that whiteness is still a problem for her, even when a white person has died, was kind of darkly humorous for me.
Yeah.
I I just thought it was Letitia ends up fighting the ghost. I forget the ghost. Do you remember the ghost's name?
Seems to me his last name was Winthrop or something. I can't
Yes,
remember
yes,
his first name
Winthrop.
now.
I
Huh?
I think one thing that Letitia said, she's like, "What are you gonna?" This is page 114 for me. What are you gonna do? She said, "You break my neck, and then what? You think I won't come back and haunt you? Go ahead, make me go see that what that gets you." Just the
Right.
audacity to say, basically, like, if you kill me, I will come back stronger than before, is just incredible from Letitia, and just very well done. So I loved that. That's honestly one of my favorite lines in the book. I mean, it's so true too. Like, if
Mm,
that ghost can stick around for unfinished business, why couldn't Letitia, right?
right.
So I loved that. I thought that was hilarious. Nice bit of levity And I'm pretty sure that's what gets Winthrop to stop. Gets him to stop, and they kind of make a kind of a peace offering between the two.
Yeah.
And she ends up kind of having conversations with the ghost, playing games with the ghost. And I just thought they kind of flip it on here because you expect her to do, go to an exorcist or I don't know, call the fucking Ghostbusters or something, right? Like
Right.
something will help Winthrop lay at rest. Maybe she'll help him personally, or maybe she'll get him exorcised from the house. We don't know.
Yeah.
Either way, that's not what happens. She just learns to live with him, and they have some kind of like weird. I don't know if I call it friendship, but a relationship at least where they kind of tolerate each other. So I really liked that.
And I'm also thinking that the ghost of Winthrop being a white person kind of represents that whole ghost story kind of represents the sins of white people's ancestors still haunting black people even up until, well past slavery. And then leave it to a strong black woman to overcome the sins of white people's predecessors still affecting black people to this day.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that's really well said. That's just another way. There's often a recourse from even back then, but I'm mostly talking about white people now. It's like, well, it's all in the past, and you guys should move on. And it's like, this stuff wasn't that long ago. On a relative like historical scale, right?
Mhm.
Um, you know, the segregation was only ended a little over 50 years ago,
Mhm.
and slavery was abolished, less than 200 years ago, right?
Right.
So it's all very recent in history, and it's
Yeah.
not like, oh, that's my great 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 great, like you're getting into the greats, sure, but it's not as long ago as people seem to think. And I mean, there's movements within black communities for reparations for a reason, right? And the book does actually address that at a certain point. But yeah, I really like this one. I thought this was kind of had a kind of a humor to it that I really appreciated. Letitia, I've already said she's basically the MVP of Lovecraft Country. And a couple other things that I noted was the fact that the white people who, the kids who end up coming in the house end up being scarier than the ghost. And I remember the firefighters keeps, asking like, "Where's the owner?" And if Letitia is the help, right? So a very kind of like demoralizing scenario that a lot of them just, Atticus especially wrestles with this. They kind of just have to take it on the chin because if they don't, they'll basically be hanged or they'll be sent to jail or whatever, for inciting violence against white people. So it ends up being that Letitia is really seen as the haunting, at least by the people of the neighborhood, not the ghost. So
Right.
we end the story with Atticus figuring out the mystery. He links it to Braithwaite, who is a character we meet in the previous story. So there's kind of your interlocking part. Was there anything else that you wanted to highlight from this story that you really liked, Luke?
Not that I can think of, no.
Okay. Yeah, but I thought this was really funny. It was a really good twist on, the ghost genre. I don't think I've ever really seen somebody befriend the ghost instead of just get them exercised. So I thought that was good.
Right?
And
Yeah, because usually the people are chased out in the end. Case in point, Amityville Horror. Like the
right,
family ends up
absolutely.
leaving.
Yeah, Amityville Horror. I was thinking about The Last House on the Left. There's just like a lot of ghost films that end with people either leaving the house or burning the house down or calling an exorcist or whatever they got to do so that they can move on in some kind of relative peace.
Yeah.
So that was Dreams of the Witch House.
Yep.
I The themes here are really good, like Luke highlighted, especially with how white people's ancestors are still kind of haunting them. So that is it for that. In the next section, we will be talking about Abdullah's book. All right, so for our next chapter, we have Abdullah's book. do believe that's how you pronounce it, Abdullah. The story behind this chapter is, I mean, titularly about Abdullah's book. A couple of the characters have to go into a museum to get a book back for this religious cult that's been a through line within the book so far. Abdullah himself has a book that has all of the harm and costs that have been done to his family over the years. Currently owned by Abdullah. Yeah, basically they have to get this book. It's not they don't have to get Abdullah's book, I don't think. I think they have to get a particular book for the religious cult that means something to them. And Abdullah's book kind of ties into things, and you kind of have a you kind of have like a book off here. But yeah, basically there's kind of like a it's kind of like a mystical heist, which was really cool. I really liked there's a line on 144 where they're talking about how one of them will, go for the book that they're going for, the treasure. And they're basically in this like kind of weightless environment. Basically, at one point, Mortimer says, Mortimer is like one of the members of the Freemasons, which Montrose is also in, I believe. And George says, "You okay, Mortimer? Mortimer?" And he says, "I could use a new pair of undershorts, but at least now I know how Superman feels." And then Montrose says, "Try using your X-ray vision on the box. What do you see?" I really like that line. So there's again some funny humor throughout this short story. But yeah, was there anything that caught your eye, Luke, throughout this?
I don't know if this would necessarily be expected or not in the book, because I haven't read horror books in a while to remember all the twists and turns that usually come with horror books. But one thing that stuck out in my mind was that Braithwaite, I think it was, like
Yeah,
actually expected the team to try to con him with a fake book. And the real book that they were looking for was the Book of Days, but what they were planning on was, getting the real book, swapping it, like keeping the real book for themselves, and then swapping it for a fake one and handing Braithwaite the fake one. But Braithwaite caught him in the library and was kind of like, "Yeah, I expected this to happen, so I got here when I expected you to be here instead of the scheduled day. But here's the money that's owed your ancestor," and it turned out to be the full amount, which I thought that was a nice little twist.
yeah.
That even though the family's plans were foiled, they still got the full amount of money that was owed them, which I think was like 300 grand plus change or something. And that included like interest over the decades and everything else. So, like that's really one thing that I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a twist I didn't see coming, but I'm glad they did it. There's too much of this in fiction where you have people just do things that are just incredulous, like or just incredible for how dumb it is. Like you're like obviously they're not going to do right by, well, I say right, but do right in quotations by, the cult. They're going to try to trick him. They're going to try to get the book for themselves, yada yada. I mean, I'm sure he's done with other stuff like this before. So it doesn't surprise me that he had something and that Braithwaite was ultimately ready for them. So I like that twist as well. I liked that he was there and he kind of expected that to happen. I really liked the whole section with them in this kind of space within the museum where they're kind of in a portal and they're looking at like like a little submarine. And I just thought this was really well painted by Matt Ruff. I really felt like, again, just like before, I felt like I was really in the scene where I am, kind of in this liminal space with some weightless elements to it, and then this mystical book, and then for some reason there's like a submarine involved. It was just there was a lot going on here that I thought was really cool.
Oh yeah, for sure. It was this was one of those books where I feel like there was a good balance between the expected and unexpected, and that goes for this chapter in particular, as well as the book in general. We'll talk about this in the next episode, but I felt the ending of the book was a nice twist too. just as another example.
And that amount did end up being $300,000
Yeah.
in mid 1950s money anyway. So I don't know what that is in inflation, but that's a lot of money.
Right. Yeah. I don't know what that is in inflation either, but wouldn't surprise me if it was at least double. So probably like
Yeah,
six
it's
hundred grand right
like
there.
I just looked it up. That is $3,980,941.
Oh shit.
That's crazy. That's a wild amount of I didn't expect it. I thought it was going to be like maybe a million or something. But yeah, that's a wild amount of inflation. But anyway, we're not an economics podcast. But yeah, that's a lot of money to just hand over. It's a double-edged sword, right? Because on one side, it's like, okay, you've got all this money now, you can do a lot with it, and they do end up doing a lot with it, like Luke said towards the end of the book. But on the other hand, it's blood money, right? I mean, it's tainted money. It's money from a white person. It's money from a cult that's already tried to kill them and kidnap them and all this other stuff. So it's a tainted victory. It's I wouldn't say it's a pyrrhic victory, but it's not that far off. Oh, and
Yeah,
also I want to
definitely.
point out that George's fucking aim at shooting the torpedo sucked. I think they must have aimed like 5 times, and every single time George tried to shoot it. I'm not saying I'd be any better, but I'm just saying like George was the one who was packing heat. He couldn't shoot for shit.
Yeah, the like I don't mean to brag here about my shooting ability because it's not like I haven't shot guns in a hot minute, so it's probably not as good as it used to be. But I did find that noticeable as well that I kind of wonder if he was even like how much he practiced. Because there was a time where I practiced so much that I was able to outshoot my own dad with his own gun. Um, but so it kind of makes me wonder how much he practiced and how much he was able to practice. Like, were there even gun ranges in Chicago at the time that a black person could safely go to?
That's
Uh,
fair.
I guess that might be a thought that you'd have as a gun owner that maybe the average person wouldn't have.
Right. And worth noting that a lot of gun laws and gun restrictions over the years have been made in response to, people of color wielding, arms, especially notable is the Black Panthers, right? So,
Right.
yeah, definitely a great point there, Luke. I think that's about it for this story, honestly. There's not a ton to talk about. I thought the concept of it was really great, and the execution was solid. I remember that they reference 27:26 for whipping. Let's see. Let's Matthew's gospel where the Savior was flogged, and I thought this was really clever by Ada, who's like a descendant of Abdullah, but basically charged $27.26 for each whipping, which was the verse from Matthew's gospel where the Savior was flogged. I also noted that her price for most common of the other insults, $22 and a quarter, was based in Deuteronomy. So just thought that was really interesting. $8,000 for the time, and then inflated to 300,000, and then now inflated to 1 million. So just wild what happens to money. But I think that's about it. I don't have too much else to say about this chapter. It's a good kind of moving piece. It gets the cult back into action in terms of the plot, and it gives us a little bit more insight. It's also just a convenient device for them all to become a little richer and have some money so that by they I mean like Montrose and George and stuff like that, to use that in future chapters, as we'll see. But yeah, unless Luke has anything else yeah, and he was right, the book of names. Unless Luke has anything else, I should say, to say, we'll go on to Hippolyta disturbs the universe. I believe I'm saying that right.
Yeah, it's either Hippolyta or Hippolyta. With that Y there, it's kind of hard to tell. But yeah, we can move on to the next chapter.
Cool, cool. So this was one of my favorites. I loved this one. I don't know about you, but I just love. Uh, okay, Google says Hippolyta. There is no way in hell I'm pronouncing it like Hippolyta. That's when I found out today that a lot of doctors pronounce it tinnitus and not tinnitus. Do you pronounce it tinnitus or
Right.
tinnitus?
I pronounced it tinnitus.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, weird. So the English language also weird, just like the economy. There's our hot take for you. So this is like I said, Hippolyta disturbs the universe. One of my favorites. I loved the story about her growing up, really loving space, just super being into it, finding it through comics, finding it through like her family and stuff like that, as well as telescopes. I just really like that. This story had a really good heart to it,
Yeah.
where I really felt emotionally connected. Hippolyta and just like all of her kind of plights that happened here. So basically, what ends up happening is that Letitia's sister Hippolyta, who we've kind of heard of in previous chapters, is the star of the show here, and basically her father had introduced her to astronomy, and she gets really into it as a kid. And now as an adult, she hasn't, for obvious reasons, as a black woman, really been able to, explore that interest in any more detail. So now she is an adult and she's going to Minnesota. And on the way there, I believe she goes and finds this observatory, this mysterious observatory. Refresh my meaning, my memory. Why did she go to Minnesota? I don't even remember.
Yeah, I don't have that written down either.
You know what was funny though? So she has this whole thing about Planet X, and that made me
Yeah.
think about I don't know if you ever watched it as a kid, but Duck Dodgers, when Daffy Duck has the whole like space gimmick, and he kind of I think it's called like Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century or something. And
Okay.
it started out as an animated short, but yeah, it was all about like Martian the Manhunter, or not Martian the Manhunter, that's a different one. Marvin the Martian, basically talking about Planet X. So that made me think about Duck Dodgers, which was a nice memory. I also thought about poor Pluto. I remember, I'm sure both when we were both kids, Pluto was still a planet, and we were both. I was bummed definitely when it just became like a dwarf star or something like that, or whatever, a dwarf planet, whatever the heck
Yeah,
it is.
Dwarf Planet. Yeah.
Yeah, dwarf planet. What a bum situation for them. I always liked that it was 9 planets. I don't know. Usually I don't like odd numbers, but I got so used to there being 9 planets in the solar system, but now it's an even eight. So anyway, poor Pluto is really what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, a couple other things that I noted from this. They had a futuristic food maker that I thought was really cool. There's also a line at 171 where she's talking about God, and I really liked that quote as well. But yeah, Luke, did anything pop out for you in terms of like really good moments? There's a lot of them. This is a really powerful story from Hippolyta, and then also there's a really good story once she gets into like kind of the horror. This one's another Lovecraftian horror story,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah, actually, that was going to be my first note. That I feel like this is one of the more Lovecraftian chapters of the book. I mean, you've got interplanetary travel. It's definitely heavy on the fear of the unknown with the new planet and all that. The gift that Ida gives Hippolyta at the end, just before she goes back to Earth. I feel like that what ended up actually being the gift was a very Lovecraftian gift too. I feel like all of the chapters at least have some kind of element on the Lovecraftian horror, but I feel like this chapter in particular was one of the heavier ones.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. The creature that they run into, the kind of cosmic, I mean, it's all about the cosmos, right? This is all about astronomy and about the stars and the planets and what's out there and things that we know and things that we don't. I found the quote. Hippolyta is talking to this woman who she found, Ida, and who Luke just mentioned. And she says, that's the Milky Way. Earth is there along with everyone and everything you've ever known or loved. It's so far, if you tried to walk back from here, the stars would all burn out before you even made a start. God himself would die of old age before you made it home. What a fucking sentence. That one really struck me. That's just such a good line. That's one of those like cold lines, as the youth would say. God himself would die of old age before you made it home. So good
Right?
shit. Just good writing right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like that was a good line. And I found it interesting that Ida found a way to survive on the planet when none of her other comrades who wound up on the planet because of Winthrop,
Yeah.
like they all died. At least a couple of them through the monsters that were on the planet. I forget if they all did, how they all died. But I find it interesting that Ida was the only one to survive, and I feel like it speaks to the positivity that Matt Ruff likes to attribute to strong black women. like, the thing about personalities is that all personalities come with both positive and negative. And I feel like Matt here, with the strength of the women in the book, portrays both sides of the personality with good measure. Like, he doesn't solely concentrate on the positive, but he doesn't solely concentrate on the negative either. I feel like he gives each side its proper balance.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I loved Ida as a character. I loved just generally like what they were doing with her as opposed to, what they did with Mary and also the guy who was with them. I really appreciated like all of their relationships and kind of like the different reactions they had to being stuck in that place, going insane or becoming becoming like closer to each other and just eventually
Yeah.
peacefully dying on your own terms kind of. And then Ida deciding she wanted to stay there. It's kind of like being in a ward to some extent. Like I can't even imagine that Mary would want to go back. I don't even think she would know how to act. Wouldn't really know how to deal with a new it's like being in a coma, for like
Yeah.
50 years or whatever it was. And then finally coming out of it and then seeing all this technology and all these different like people and just like I think it would, I'm not saying she couldn't survive it, but it'd definitely be a shock to her. And it's easier at that point in her life when she's much older to just, kind of die there and just
Yeah.
be content with the life that she had lived. But this was really great. I think that if I had a favorite, I think it'd be this one. There's a really cute ending. I won't give too much away, but it kind of comes back around to a conversation that Mary and Hippolyta have between each other about food, and it was just really cute. And I
Oh,
liked
yeah,
that
for sure.
ending. Gordon was his name. There was also James, Gordon and James. So there's four of them, and yeah, basically
Yeah.
Winthrop put them in there. I think because they knew too much and they were going to talk, if I remember correctly, but basically put him in this like interdimensional portal or whatever. And there's this creature on the beach with all of them. They're trying to like get around it and stuff like that. And
Right.
yeah, there's some good twists at the end about how Mary is able to help, or Ida is able to help Hippolyta, even though she's not there with her, which I thought was also really clever. Just lots of little, really clever moments here, and an overall like really good heart, really strong core to the story. With her passion with Hippolyta's passion for astronomy. So good stuff. Like I said, this would probably be one of my favorites. Anything else you want to add about the story?
I do find it interesting that, like, in order to, at least one of the ways that Matt Ruff got this chapter connected to the story at large was that it was Winthrop, one of the Winthrop guys, who because his son ran off with the maid, like, put all these people on the planet, and uh and he went to go come back for him later to get answers out of him, and then he ended up being murdered by Winthrop. No, by Braithwaite. I'm sorry. He ended up being killed by Samuel Braithwaite,
Right.
and I I kind of felt like that was an interesting way to connect it to the rest of the story, kind of like, because when Winthrop had obviously discovered the planet, and Braithwaite probably, I'm guessing, I don't think the story said this, but Winthrop, I'm guessing, didn't want that information getting out, so he would rather risk all of the other people dying on the planet as a result of his actions. He would rather risk that, the knowledge of the planet's existence getting out, which I
Yeah.
thought was an interesting twist on the story.
Sure. Yeah, I like that as well. The Braithwaite and Winthrop connection here was definitely strengthened one of the big plot points here, and just also just how ruthless both of them could be. So, good stuff on both. Really go check it out. Honestly, if there is one story besides, we'll talk about it later, but Horace and the Devil Doll, those were probably that and this were probably my favorite stories. Nothing against the other stories, which were also great. All right, well, that is going to do it for Luke and myself, Ellie. We are going to look at the rest of Lovecraft Country in the next episode. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening. Our first episode, we'll be back in a week's time from when you're listening to this, which should hopefully be, fingers crossed, sometime in the fall. Wishing everyone the best fall vibes. Take care.
Yeah, everybody, hoping you enjoyed the first episode. And we know things are going to be a touch rocky, but we hope that everything will be smoothed out by the end of the first season. Well, fingers crossed, like Ellie said, we'll start releasing episodes in the fall, and then hopefully we have enough built up where we can release them on a weekly basis.
Absolutely. Yep. First cut's always the deepest, and the first season of the podcast is always the weakest. So that's how that song goes, I'm pretty sure.
All
So
right.
thanks everybody for listening. 13 episodes to get it right. We're looking forward to talking more Lovecraft Country in the next episode. We'll see you then. Bye.
Bye.